Have you ever heard the idea that a single chapter of the Bible, written thousands of years ago, could be the absolute pivot point for all of human history? Dr. Chuck Missler calls it the fulcrum of the entire universe. It's a massive claim, so let's really dig into what that means. So, right out of the gate, we're hit with a pretty mind-bending question. Could a detailed, almost play-by-play description of a Roman crucifixion actually have been written down 7 full centuries before it even happened? I mean, this really challenges how we think about history and ancient texts. Okay, so the text we're talking about is Isaiah, chapter 53. And it's not just any old chapter. It paints this incredibly vivid and honestly pretty mysterious picture of a figure that's become known as the suffering servant, a person who goes through unbelievable hardship, but for someone else's sake. And this is where it gets really intense. According to the source, this chapter was so controversial, so potentially explosive, that some ancient Jewish communities apparently removed it from their regular cycle of readings in the synagogue. This wasn't just a passage they'd skip over. It was seen as profoundly challenging. So this really boils down to 2 huge questions, right? First, who is this servant? But we can't even touch that one until we deal with the elephant in the room, the question that every skeptic asks. Was this thing really written in the 8th century BC by Isaiah, or was it sneakily added hundreds of years later after the fact? To get to the bottom of that, we have to play detective for a minute. We need to look at the evidence for when this was written. I mean, the entire credibility of this as a prophecy hangs on nailing down that date. So you've got 2 main camps here. On one side, there's the Deutero-Isaiah theory. It basically says, look, the second half of this book, chapters 40 to 66, feels different. It must have been written by a second, later author. The source we're looking at argues that this theory really comes from a simple bias, a disbelief that genuine, predictive prophecy is even possible. On the other side, you have the argument for a single early author, which relies on things you can actually point to, manuscripts, the language used, and historical clues. So what is that evidence? Well, first off, you've got the Great Isaiah Scroll, one of the famous Dead Sea Scrolls. It's from 125 BC, and it shows the book as one single continuous text. There's no big part 2 starting at chapter 40. Then there are these little linguistic fingerprints, like the phrase, the Holy One of Israel. It pops up consistently in both halves of the book. And get this, the Hebrew used is from before the Babylonian exile. It doesn't have the loan words you'd expect from a later writer. And finally, you see New Testament writers, like John, quoting from both the first and second halves of Isaiah back to back, and they attribute it all to one guy, the prophet Isaiah. Okay, so let's say we roll with the evidence for an early date. That means we're looking at a text from the 8th century BC. So the next logical question is, what does this ancient portrait actually describe? What are the clues? Well, the first clue is that this is not your typical hero story. This person isn't a celebrated king. He's an outcast. He's defined by sadness and pain, a guy that people would literally turn away from on the street. And then it makes this absolutely radical claim. His suffering? It's not because he did anything wrong. The text is crystal clear. He's wounded for our mistakes, bruised for our sins. The punishment he takes is meant to bring us peace. And the details just keep coming. Look at how he reacts to it all. He's totally silent. No arguments, no defending himself. Just this quiet, almost passive submission, like a lamb being led to its death. And then you get this last part, which honestly sounds like a riddle. He's supposed to be buried with the wicked, like a criminal, but also with the rich. How could both of those things possibly be true at the same time? It's a very specific and very strange combination. All right, so we've got these ancient clues: rejected, suffering for others, silent, and this weird burial. Now for the big part. How do these dots supposedly connect to historical events that were recorded centuries later? And this is the heart of the argument. Laid out, side by side, on the left, Isaiah's words from 700 BC. His silence? The Gospels record Jesus saying nothing before Pilate. Being numbered with the transgressors? He's crucified between 2 criminals. And that impossible burial? He's executed like a criminal, the wicked, but then buried in the private new tomb of a wealthy man, Joseph of Arimathea. But here's what might be the most startling part of all, according to the source. The text seems to be describing crucifixion. The thing is, crucifixion wasn't a form of execution used by Israel in Isaiah's time. Their method was stoning. This specific, brutal form of death was perfected by the Persians and then, of course, the Romans centuries in the future. So this brings us full circle. Why call this one chapter the fulcrum of the entire universe? The source says the answer isn't just in what happened, but in the why. What was the whole point of this servant's death? And the text itself gives the reason. It says we're all like lost sheep and that God has placed the sin, the iniquity of all of us onto this one person. He's not just an innocent man caught in the crossfire. He's a willing substitute. And this is the big theological climax. The argument is that Isaiah 53 is the clearest Old Testament explanation of a core Christian doctrine, substitutionary atonement. The idea that an innocent person can step in and take the punishment for the guilty. According to the source, this isn't just a side note. It is the central mechanism of salvation. It's the reason why this chapter is considered the pivot point on which all of history turns. So, at the end of the day, what are we left with? You have this 2,700-year-old text. Is it a stunningly accurate prophecy that defies all odds? Is it a beautiful, powerful piece of metaphorical poetry? Or is it just one of the most incredible strings of coincidences in all of history? The source has laid out its case, and now the verdict is up to you.